The words came out of Holt Devereux's mouth like he had been saving them for years. "You were never the woman I needed beside me. You were just the woman who was there." He said it, standing in the middle of her mother's kitchen 3 hours after the funeral, still wearing the tie he had loosened in the church parking lot. Nadine Vos Devereux, the 36-year-old wife of Holt and silent founding partner of Meridian Health Group, stood at the sink with her mother's good dish towel in her hands, too hollowed out from grief to understand at first that what she was hearing was not an apology. It was a dismissal. Behind him stood Camille Ozzie, 29, a corporate wellness consultant Meridian had hired 6 months earlier for the flagship hospital rollout. Camille wore black, but nothing about the way she stood beside Holt suggested mourning. Her hand rested near his elbow like she had already measured the space and decided it belonged to her. Holt looked at Nadine the way men look at furniture they have decided to donate. "Your father's gone now. There is nothing holding this together anymore." Nadine's older brother, Quentin Vos, 41, stood in the doorway with a paper plate of food going cold in his hand. He had heard everything. His face went very still. The family attorney, Sable Merrick, 63, was seated at the kitchen table behind a stack of estate papers. She had known Nadine's father for 31 years. She did not look up from the table, but her jaw tightened in a way that told everyone she had heard too. Holt placed an envelope on the counter beside the dish rack. "I had this prepared 2 weeks ago. I waited because of your father. I thought that was the decent thing." Nadine looked at the envelope, then she looked at Camille. Then she looked back at her husband. She asked only one question. "You brought her here?" Holt said nothing. That silence told her more than any answer could have. Nadine set the dish towel down on the counter, folded it once, and walked out of the kitchen. She did not cry until she was in her father's study, with the door closed, and even then, she kept her hand pressed flat against his old oak desk like she needed to feel something solid beneath her. What Holt Devereux did not know, what he had never cared enough to learn in 8 years of marriage, was that the health system he had spent the last 4 years building his career inside belonged to the woman he had just discarded. Meridian Health Group had been her father's original vision. Nadine had carried it after his first illness, restructured it after the board nearly fractured it in the early years, and quietly held majority ownership through the Vos Family Medical Trust since she was 29 years old. Her name did not appear on his badge. It did not appear in the press materials Holt used to get himself photographed at ribbon cuttings. Her title inside Meridian's public documents listed her as a legacy trust consultant, which was accurate the way calling the ocean a large puddle is accurate. Holt knew she had some connection to the Vos Family Foundation. He had never once opened the trust documents. Sable had offered to walk him through before their wedding. He had signed his own prenuptial agreement without reading past the second page and told his attorney it was all old family sentiment anyway. He had assumed the sentiment was modest. It was not modest. 3 days after the funeral, Nadine sat in her father's study until nearly midnight, reading a letter Ellison Vos had left with Sable to be delivered when the time was right. Ellison's handwriting was careful and a little slow from the years of medication, but the sentences were exactly like him. Direct, quiet, impossible to misread. "Nadine, if someone ever uses your grief as an opening, do not answer with grief. The trust exists for a reason. The reason is you." She read it 3 times. The third time, she stopped crying. Her closest friend, Waverly Dunn, 38, a pediatric surgeon at Meridian's Children's Division, and the only person outside the legal circle who understood what the Vos Trust actually meant, arrived at the house the next morning with coffee and a face full of worry. "He really did it at the reception," Waverly said. It was not a question. Nadine nodded. Waverly sat across from her at the kitchen table. "What are you going to do?" Nadine wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I'm going to go to work." That was all she said. Meridian Health Group's main building was a 12-floor glass structure that her father had broken ground on when Nadine was 19 years old. She remembered standing beside him in a hard hat, 2 sizes too big, holding a ceremonial shovel, squinting in the sunlight, while her father told a small crowd of investors and construction workers that medicine should feel like someone is on your side. The lobby had a wall of photographs documenting the system's history. Ellison was in nearly all of them. Nadine was in a few, always slightly behind him, slightly to the side, the way she had learned to stand in rooms full of people who underestimated her family's generosity and mistook it for weakness. Holt was in several of the more recent photographs, always at the center, always smiling like a man accepting a gift he had convinced himself he earned. Nadine walked past those photographs on the morning she returned to work. She did not stop in front of any of them. Dominic Prell, 57, the chief financial officer of Meridian and one of 4 people who knew the full structure of the Vos Trust, met her at the elevator with a careful expression and 2 manila folders. "How are you holding up?" he said. He meant it sincerely and she knew it. "Tell me what I missed," she said. Dominic opened the first folder as they walked. There had been expense irregularities flagged by the internal audit team 3 weeks earlier, right around the time Nadine had been moving between hospitals and hospice care for her father. The review had been paused pending her return. A physician wellness retreat, 4 nights billed to the Strategic Development Fund. Camille O.C. listed as the program coordinator. 2 attendees confirmed. Neither was a physician. A consulting fee paid to a company called O.C. Advisory Group, registered 6 months prior to a P.O. box in Georgia. The scope of services listed as community health engagement, no deliverable on file. A set of speaking engagement bookings in Holt's name, 3 conferences, 1 international, all listed under the Meridian Executive Outreach budget. Camille O.C. listed as his travel coordinator on 2 of them. Dominic closed the folder. "There is more, but I wanted to wait until I could show you in person." Nadine did not react emotionally. She thought of Sable's voice on the phone the night before. "Do not let this become a story about a wife and a husband. Let it become a story about the institution and the people who misused it." "Keep pulling," Nadine said. "Everything tied to those expense accounts going back 18 months. Dominic nodded once and disappeared into the elevator. In the hallway near the executive suite, Nadine saw Holt before he saw her. He was standing with his director of communications, Gareth Sloan, 44, a man who was very good at making mediocre ideas sound visionary in board presentations. They were laughing about something. Holt's jacket was perfectly pressed. He looked like a man who had slept without difficulty. Then he turned and saw Nadine. His smile did not disappear entirely. It recalibrated. "I didn't expect you back so soon," he said. "I know," she said. She walked past him without stopping. She heard Gareth say something low and Holt respond with a small dismissive sound that she recognized. It was the sound he made when he wanted someone to believe a situation was already handled. The situation was not handled. In the conference room 3 floors up, a young woman named Jory Almstead, 27, sat alone at a long table with a folder pressed against her chest like a shield. Jory was a researcher who had spent 2 years developing a rural outreach program she called the Corridor Initiative, a mobile diagnostic system designed to serve patients in medically underserved counties within a 4-hour radius of Meridian's main campus. She had presented it to the Strategic Development Committee 8 months earlier. The committee had said they needed more time to review it. 6 weeks ago, Meridian had announced a new program. The rollout was credited to Holt Devereaux and his strategic innovation team. The program was called the Community Reach Network. The architecture was identical. Waverly had found Jory 2 days earlier. She had called Nadine that night and said only, "You need to hear this directly from her." Nadine sat across from Jory now. She looked at the folder on the table, then at the young woman's face, which was working hard to hold itself together. "I know what it looks like," Jory said. "Like I can't prove anything." "Tell me what happened," Nadine said. "Start from the beginning." Jory's voice was careful. She had clearly rehearsed parts of this. The way people rehearse things they are afraid no one will believe. She told Nadine about the initial meeting with Holt's team, about how his deputy director had taken her presentation slides and said they would circulate them internally, about how she had followed up 4 times and been told the committee was still deliberating, about how she had found the Community Reach Network announcement on Meridian's website on a Tuesday morning in March. Her name appeared nowhere in the announcement. In the internal documentation, she was listed as a junior research consultant who had contributed background data. Nadine looked at the folder. "Is your original material dated and preserved?" Jory opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, time-stamped presentations, a grant proposal she had submitted to the Voss Foundation directly, and a signed letter of acknowledgement from Ellison Voss dated 14 months earlier. Nadine stared at her father's signature. He had known about Jory's work. He had supported it. He had died not knowing someone had stripped his name and her daughter's principles out of it and repackaged it under a man who called his own wife ordinary. Nadine put her hand very gently over the letter. "My father read this," she said quietly. Jory looked surprised. "He did?" Nadine lifted her eyes. "So do I, and this time someone is going to door. The next 2 weeks moved slowly on the surface and very quickly underneath it. Sable brought in outside legal counsel, a firm that specialized in fiduciary misconduct and institutional ethics. Dominic reconstructed 18 months of expense records and found 4 additional irregularities beyond the initial 3. Waverly documented the timeline of the Community Reach Network against Jory's original Corridor Initiative materials. The alignment was not coincidental. It was structural. Holt continued to arrive at work each morning with perfect posture and no visible awareness that anything was shifting beneath him. He scheduled a profile interview with a regional health publication called Meridian Now. He agreed to speak at a leadership summit 3 weeks out. He had Gareth distribute a press packet about the Community Reach Network's first quarter outcomes. Gareth distributed it widely. It was added to the evidence file the same afternoon. Camille came and went through the executive floor with the confidence of someone who believed the access she had was permanent. She sat in 3 meetings she was not strictly required to attend. She sent Holt a text message during a board preparation session that Dominic, reviewing communications under audit authorization, flagged and preserved. The message read, "After the summit, you will be untouchable. She won't be able to do anything." She meaning Nadine. Dominic brought the message to Sable without telling Nadine first. Sable called Nadine that evening and read it to her over the phone. There was a long pause. Then Nadine said, "She has no idea what she's standing in." Sable said nothing. She had known Ellison Voss for 31 years. She recognized his daughter's voice when she heard it. The Meridian Annual Leadership Summit had been on the calendar for 6 months. It was the organization's largest gathering of the year. Board members, clinical leadership, community partners, donor families, hospital trustees, media representatives, and the major philanthropic voices in the regional health landscape. Holt was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. It was called Innovation Without Permission. He had written the title himself. Dominic had seen the draft 2 weeks before the summit and said nothing. He had placed a copy in the evidence file and gone back to his desk. The morning of the summit, Nadine arrived at the convention center through a service entrance. She wore a charcoal dress, clean and simple, her mother's old watch on her left wrist. She carried no notes. She had nothing to prove to the room that required paper. Waverley met her near the back corridor with a face full of the specific kind of calm that people wear when they are terrified but have decided to hold still anyway. "Holt is already backstage," Waverley said. "I know," Nadine said. "Camille is with him." "I know that too." Jory stood a few feet away near a supply cart, wearing a visitor badge and a blazer that was slightly too big for her. She looked at Nadine the way people look at the one person in a room they believe might actually see them. Nadine walked to her. "You ready?" "No," Jory said honestly. "That's the right answer," Nadine said. In the green room, Holt stood in front of a mirror while a media coordinator adjusted his lapel microphone. He had the satisfied expression of a man who had already decided how the morning would go. Camille sat on a leather bench nearby, reviewing the program schedule. Gareth leaned against the wall with his tablet, monitoring social media for early summit coverage. A young stage assistant knocked and leaned into the doorway. "Mr. Devereaux, we're 15 minutes out." Holt straightened his tie. "Perfect." He did not know that in the projection room above the main hall, Dominic and the outside legal team had uploaded a second presentation package alongside the official keynote. He did not know the package had been reviewed and authorized by Meridian's Board Ethics Subcommittee the previous afternoon. He did not know Sable had spent 40 minutes on the phone with the board chair, Renata Ellsworth, 71. A woman who had served on the Meridian board since Ellison's second year, walking through each document line by line. Renata had listened without interruption. At the end she had said, "Ellison built this to protect people. Do it correctly and I will back every step." The main hall seated 400. By the time the program opened, every seat was full. The summit chair, a cardiologist named Dr. Obafemi Adesanya, 52, welcomed the room with a brief address about the year's clinical milestones. The room was warm and attentive. Donors smiled at the outcome slides. Trustees leaned forward at the community impact numbers. Then he introduced Holt. The applause was generous. Holt walked to the podium with the ease of someone who had been practicing this specific walk in his imagination for years. He placed both hands on the edges of the lectern and looked out at the room like a man accepting something he had always expected was coming. "Innovation," he began, "doesn't wait for permission." Waverley, seated 3 rows from the back, looked down at her hands. Jory sat beside her, very still. Nadine stood near the side exit in shadow. She had been in this room before. She had watched her father stand at this same podium 11 years ago and thank a room full of people who had believed in something before it was certain. She remembered the exact way he had gripped the edges of the lectern. She was gripping nothing now. Her hands were folded in front of her, still as water. Holt spoke for 12 minutes about vision, about risk, about the Community Reach Network, and what he called the courage it took to push an idea past institutional hesitation. He did not mention Jory Almstead. He did not mention the Corridor Initiative. He did not mention Ellison Voss by name, though he referenced a founding legacy that had cleared the path for bold leadership. He meant himself, every word of it. In the projection room, Dominic's phone lit up with a message from Sable. One word: ready. Dominic looked at the operator beside him. Switch to package 2 on my mark. He picked up his phone and typed one word to Nadine. Now. Nadine typed back one word. Yes. The screen behind Holt went dark for 4 seconds. He glanced back at it, mildly annoyed, assuming a technical delay. Someone in the third row shifted in their seat. Then the Meridian Health Group seal appeared on the screen. Not the promotional logo. The official institutional seal, the one that appeared on board resolutions and legal filings. The room went slightly quieter in the way rooms do when they sense something has changed without being told what. A text line appeared beneath the seal. Before today's program continues, Meridian Health Group is required to present findings from a recently completed internal ethics review. Holt's hand tightened on the lectern. The first document appeared, clean white slide, institutional font, no drama, an expense record, physician wellness retreat, 4 nights charged to strategic development, attendee list, no attending physicians. Murmurs began at the outer edges of the room. The second document, consulting fees to OC Advisory Group, scope of services, community health engagement, 0 deliverables on record. The third document, speaking engagement travel costs, 3 events, 1 international, corporate card charges. Coordinator, Camille OC. Gareth, who had been standing near the side aisle, tried to move toward the projection booth. A Meridian security officer stepped quietly in front of him and handed him a sealed envelope. Gareth looked at the envelope. He sat down. The screen changed. A new slide appeared. Corridor Initiative, submitted to Meridian Strategic Development Committee by Jory Almstead, Research Fellow. Original submission date, 14 months prior to the Community Reach Network announcement. Side by side, the 2 program structures appeared on screen. Architecture, timeline, target counties, mobile unit specifications, community partnership framework. One had Jory's name on it. One had Holt's. They were the same program. The room had gone completely silent. Holt stepped back from the podium. His voice came out uneven. This is being taken out of context. He looked for Camille. She was standing near the side aisle, and she was not looking at him. She was looking at the screen with an expression that Waverley later described as a woman calculating which direction to run. The next slide appeared. A signed letter from Ellison Voss, his handwriting at the top, his signature at the bottom. Corridor Initiative. This proposal demonstrates exactly the kind of grounded, patient-first thinking Meridian was built to protect. Approved for development support, Ellison Voss, founding director. A woman in the 5th row pressed her fingers to her mouth. A board trustee leaned over and said something to the man beside him. Renata Ellsworth, seated in the front corner, looked at the signature for a long moment and then looked at Holt, with an expression that was very quiet and very final. The next slide was not a document, it was audio. The room filled with a recording from a hotel corridor, recovered from a security camera outside the Strategic Development Suite. Quality was imperfect, but clear enough. Holt's voice and Gareth's voice, 11 months ago. Gareth asking what they were going to do about the Almstead presentation. Holt saying the girl had no allies and no standing. Gareth asking again. Holt saying, give her a research credit and stop worrying about it. In the back row, Jory Almstead put both hands over her fade. Meridian Health Group Controlling Trust, Voss Family Medical Trust, majority owner and active chair of the trust board, Nadine Voss Devereaux. Holt turned toward the side of the room. Nadine stepped out of the shadow. She walked down the side aisle without hurrying. The room did not part for her dramatically. People simply moved because she was moving, and there was something in her posture that made it clear. The room was hers and had always been. She reached the front. She did not stand at the podium where Holt had been standing. She stood beside Jory Almstead, who had come down from the back rows quietly while the final slide was still on screen. Nadine looked at the room. My father built Meridian Health Group to protect people who had no one in the room with power, she said. That is still why it exists. Tonight's proceedings are not about a marriage or a divorce. They are about what this institution was built to do and what happened when someone used it differently. She reached into the folder Jory was holding and withdrew the original Corridor Initiative proposal. She placed it on the presentation table. Jory Almstead is the originating architect of what Meridian has been calling the Community Reach Network. Effective today, the program will be renamed, the credit will be corrected, and Jory will lead its continued development with full institutional support and appropriate compensation. Someone in the room began to applaud. It was a single person at first. Then the back rows, then the trustees, then nearly everyone, not for the drama of it, but for the particular feeling a room gets when something that was wrong gets corrected in front of witnesses. Holt stood to the side of the stage. His microphone was still clipped to his lapel, live and unnecessary now. He looked at Nadine, and it was the first time in 8 years of marriage that he looked at her without already deciding what she was worth. You own this, he said. It came out quiet, almost bewildered. Nadine looked at him. I built it with my father. You worked here. There is a difference. Camille tried to leave through the main aisle. A Meridian communications officer met her near the door and handed her a sealed legal notice. She looked at the envelope, then at Holt, and then she looked away in a manner that told the room she was recalculating everything. Sable stepped forward from the side of the stage. She handed Holt a sealed envelope of his own. Her voice was steady and professionally kind, in the way of someone who has delivered difficult documents before and understands that the dignity in it matters. Mr. Devereux, your executive access to Meridian systems is suspended effective immediately pending the outcome of the ethics review. Outside counsel will be in contact regarding expense recovery, program credit, and the terms of your employment agreement. Holt held the envelope without opening it. Gareth, still in his seat with his own sealed notice in his lap, looked at the floor. Renata Ellsworth stood from her chair in the front corner and turned to face the room. She had been on the Meridian board since Ellison's second year, and she had the particular authority of a woman who does not need a microphone to be heard. The board affirms these findings and supports the corrective measures presented today, she said. The Trust's leadership is intact. Meridian's mission is intact. We continue. That was all she said. It was exactly enough. Weeks later, the news moved through the regional health and business community the way corrections always do, imperfectly in pieces, but persistently. The Community Reach Network was renamed the Corridor Initiative. Jory's name appeared in the official announcement, in the grant documentation, and in the Meridian annual report that Nadine approved before it went to print. Holt's profile interview with Meridian Now was quietly cancelled. The Leadership Summit coverage that Gareth had worked to shape ran instead with a photograph of Jory at a mobile diagnostic unit in a rural county and a caption that said the program had returned to its original vision. Camille's consulting contract was voided. The OC Advisory Group's registration dissolved 3 weeks later. Gareth resigned before the Ethics Committee finished its review. The Corridor Initiative's first full operational quarter served 11 counties. It ran on time and under budget. Jory stopped clutching her folders quite so tightly. She still brought them everywhere. But she walked differently through the Meridian building now, with the specific ease of someone who had been told the truth about where they stood and found it was solid ground. Nadine stopped using the side entrance. The first morning she walked through the main lobby, she passed the wall of photographs without stopping. She did not look at the ones with Holt in the center. She looked at the earliest ones, the ones from the groundbreaking and the first patient intake days, the ones where her father was young and tired and proud and her mother was standing slightly behind him with her hand at the small of his back. Nadine touched the edge of one frame, just briefly, just enough. At the next board meeting, she sat at the head of the table. Not because she needed the room to know she was in charge. Because she was in charge, and the room already knew it, and there was no longer any reason to stand somewhere smaller. After the meeting, Waverley met her in the hallway. Waverley asked. Nadine thought about it honestly, like I finally stopped standing to the side. Waverley nodded. They walked together toward the elevator. At the end of the hallway, the lobby atrium opened below them. The crown logo her father had designed on the day Meridian filed its original charter, simple and clean, and still there after all of it. Nadine pressed the button for the ground floor. Some people spend years making themselves smaller to protect someone who was never worth the space they gave up. The hard part is not the moment you stop. The hard part is learning that the room was always yours, and silence was never the same thing as losing.